thought they were teaching me a lesson. They texted me the morning of the ceremony, saying, "We hope this teaches you humility." All because I refused to change my wedding date, a date I'd booked a year in advance, just so my golden child sister wouldn't have to reschedule her luxury Bali vacation. They expected me to call them crying, begging for forgiveness. But I didn't shed a single tear. I walked down the aisle alone, smiled through the pain, and married the love of my life. The Golden family thought they had won their petty game, leaving an empty front row just to humiliate me. But they had no idea what my husband had planned. At the reception, with 200 guests in the room, he stood up, took the microphone, and revealed a secret that turned their smug victory into total ruin. My name is Charlotte, and I am 31 years old. If there is one thing I've learned in my 3 decades on this earth, it's that being the older sibling in a toxic family dynamic setup means your milestones don't count unless they serve the golden child. For as long as I can remember, my younger sister, Chloe, has been the center of my parents' universe. If I got an A, Chloe's B- was celebrated louder. If I saved up for a used car, my parents bought Chloe a brand new one. I adjusted, grew up, and eventually found Mark, the most supportive, incredible man I could have ever asked for. When Mark proposed, we promised ourselves that our wedding day would be ours alone. We spent an entire year meticulously planning every detail, finally locking down a breathtaking, highly sought-after venue for a gorgeous Saturday afternoon. We sent out the invitations, paid the non-refundable deposits, and felt a rare moment of pure happiness. Then, Chloe stepped in. Just 3 weeks after our invitations landed in everyone's mailboxes, Chloe casually announced in the family group chat that she had just booked an exclusive, luxury wellness retreat to Bali. The problem? Her flight left the exact morning of my wedding. She didn't care. She expected the world to pause for her. Before we dive deeper into how far my parents went to protect her vacation, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a major life milestone completely overshadowed? The moment I texted Chloe reminding her that the retreat overlapped with my wedding, my phone blew up. It wasn't Chloe who called, but my father. He demanded Mark and I come over for an emergency family meeting immediately. When we arrived, the tension in the living room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother sat on the sofa rubbing Chloe's back, while Chloe sniffled dramatically as if she were the victim of a terrible tragedy. My father didn't waste any time with pleasantries. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Charlotte, you need to move the wedding back by 2 months. Chloe's Bali trip is a rare networking opportunity, and it's non-refundable." I stood there, completely stunned. Mark spoke up, calmly explaining that our venue was booked a year ago and we would lose over $10,000 in non-refundable vendor deposits if we rescheduled now. But my father slammed his hand down on the coffee table. "Money comes and goes, but family always comes first," he shouted, completely ignoring the fact that Chloe was the one putting a vacation over family. Seeing my silence, he decided to drop the hammer. He leaned in, his face cold, and delivered a final ultimatum. "If you refuse to change the date, your mother and I will not be attending. We will completely boycott the wedding." For the first time in my 31 years, I looked him right back and said, "Then I guess we will miss you there." Following that explosive confrontation, the silence from my parents was deafening. Over the next 2 months, they gave me the absolute cold shoulder, completely cutting off all communication. They blocked my number, ignored my emails, and refused to offer a single ounce of help with our final wedding preparations. Instead, they spent their time loudly bragging on social media about funding Chloe's entire, lavish vacation wardrobe. Mark and I had to lean on each other and our close friends just to cross the finish line. Then came the morning of the wedding. As I sat in the bridal suite having my hair styled, my phone buzzed on the vanity table. It was a text message from my father. My heart hammered in my chest as I opened it, foolishly hoping for a last-minute change of heart. Instead, the text was incredibly cruel. It read, "We are staying home. We hope this teaches you humility." A wave of heat rushed to my face, but to my own surprise, I didn't break down. I didn't shed a single tear. I looked at the screen, realized the depth of their manipulation, and calmly deleted the text. When Mark walked into the room a few minutes later, I showed him what had happened. He knelt beside my chair, gently took my hands in his, and looked into my eyes with fierce determination. "Don't you worry, Charlotte," he whispered. "Today is about us, and I promise you, justice will be served." The church doors finally swung open, and I took a deep breath, stepping forward into the venue. The space looked absolutely magnificent, beautifully adorned with soft lighting, stunning floral arrangements, and a crowd of smiling faces. But as my eyes swept across the room, they locked onto one glaring, deeply painful detail. The entire front row on the bride's side was completely empty. There were no proud parents waiting to watch their oldest daughter take this massive step. There was no sister smiling from the bridal party. A heavy wave of whispers immediately rippled through the 200 guests as they noticed the vacant seats, the quiet murmurs bouncing off the walls of the venue. My stomach twisted, but I forced my chin up, refusing to look defeated. I walked down the aisle entirely alone, keeping my eyes fixed forward. The moment my gaze met Mark's, all the background noise faded away. He was standing at the altar with a look of pure devotion, his steady presence anchoring me. As we held hands and began to exchange our deeply personal vows, the initial sting of abandonment completely melted into the background. We were cementing our union, committing to building a genuine, loving life together, completely independent of the cruel and petty games played by my biological family. They thought their absence would break my spirit, but standing there with Mark, I had never felt stronger. With the emotional ceremony behind us, the tension in the air gave way to celebration as we moved into the reception. The music played, the dinner was served, and the atmosphere felt genuinely warm. But everyone in the room was still acutely aware of the elephant in the room, the missing parents of the bride. Finally, the time arrived for the traditional toasts, and Mark stood up, walking calmly to the center of the floor with a microphone in his hand. The room of 200 guests went completely quiet, the gentle clinking of silverware instantly fading away. Everyone leaned forward, expecting a standard, polite groom's speech thanking the vendors and the attendees. Instead, Mark looked directly out at the crowd, took a deep breath, and addressed the empty front row head-on. He didn't sugarcoat it. He laid out the absolute truth, explaining to my extended family, childhood friends, and corporate colleagues exactly why my parents had boycotted our wedding to support a vacation. But he didn't stop there. Mark dropped a massive, devastating financial bombshell that caused an audible gasp to ripple through the entire room. He revealed that just the night before, while double-checking our wedding funds, he had uncovered something horrifying. My father had secretly used his old administrative access to my childhood savings account to pull out thousands of dollars. They had stolen my hard-earned savings to help fund Chloe's luxury travel and shopping spree in Bali, confidently assuming I would be too distracted by the wedding to notice until they returned. The collective shock in the room was absolute. The smug victory my family thought they had achieved was instantly exposed as nothing more than cheap, criminal deceit. The immediate fallout from Mark's speech was swift and chaotic. As the reality of my parents' actions sank in, the reception room erupted into a frenzy of hushed whispers and furious typing. My aunts, uncles, and cousins were completely horrified by the revelation of the theft. Right there at the dinner tables, extended family members pulled out their phones and began sending a barrage of blistering text messages directly to my parents, fiercely condemning them for their greed, cruelty, and deceit. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Chloe was completely oblivious, blissfully posting sun-drenched beach photos and luxury resort stories from Bali on her social media accounts. Her timing couldn't have been worse. Back home, my parents' phones were absolutely blowing up with calls and messages from outraged relatives. Several family investments immediately notified him via text that they were cutting him off both financially and socially until every single cent was returned to me. The smug, controlling tables had turned in an instant. Just an hour into our reception, my father frantically called Mark's phone. The arrogant man who had smugly texted me about humility just hours earlier was now completely gone. Instead, his voice was trembling with pure panic as he practically begged Mark to take back the statement, completely terrified that his reputation in the community was ruined. He kept repeating that it was a family matter and shouldn't have been made public. Mark listened calmly for a moment, looked over at me with a reassuring smile, and simply hung up on him, leaving them to drown in the digital storm they had created. In the weeks following our wedding, the legal consequences for my parents quickly caught up with them. With the clear evidence Mark had uncovered, we took immediate action to freeze the compromised accounts. Faced with the threat of public criminal charges for grand larceny and fraud, my father had no choice but to comply. He was forced to immediately liquidate his own assets to repay every single cent of my stolen savings. This sudden financial drain completely cut off the cash flow for the rest of Chloe's luxury travel plans, forcing her to cut her vacation short and fly back home to a family ruined by their own greed. Reflecting on everything, I realized that my parents' attempt to boycott my wedding was actually a blessing in disguise. By cutting off their toxic influence, I was finally able to step out of Chloe's shadow and build a true, loving home centered on mutual respect with Mark. Now, I'm incredibly curious about you who listened to my story today. What would you have done if your spouse stood up for you at your wedding the way Mark did for me? Would you have pursued legal action against your own parents? Or meanwhile, don't forget to mention the city you're watching from so I can see exactly how far Charlotte's story has reached.